Every year, I participate in one of the most insane challenges known to mankind. It's a 48-hour game jam. This year, I participated in one hosted by GMTK Game Maker's Toolkit. Basically, it's 48 hours where developers sell their soul for a weekend to make a barely playable game and get a small glimpse of indie game dev fame as other game dev players play their games solely so that you can play and rate theirs back. Okay, this is really not that bad. It's actually pretty fun. This year's theme was the roll of the dice.
Hi everyone, the 6th annual GMTK Game Jam begins now. Your goal over the next 48 hours is to make a game that fits the following theme. Roll of the dice.
Since roll of the dice basically means RNG with a dice visual tacked on, naturally, I decided to add RNG loot boxes that look like dice to a game like Rocket League. Oh wait, they already did that.
I'm gonna do a no-look crate. Come on. Be big. It could be huge. It could be terrible. It could be dueling dragons right now. Skip. Oh, I think I just saw it come back from the showroom. I don't think it was the dueling dragons. Oh! You know what? A no-look painted exotic. I think that's what I was after.
Okay, anyway, so to prep for the jam, I always try to have a few ideas on hand, and then when the theme is released, I figure out which idea fits the theme the most and which idea would be the most fun while applying that theme to it. So this year, I really wanted to make a Rocket League game, but it was in golf. This is one of my few ideas that I came pre-ready with, and when they announced that the theme was dice, I decided, you know what, why not make Rocket League with golf, but instead of hitting the golf ball with a golf cart, hit a dice with a golf cart that looks like a golf ball, and then whatever side it lands on is how many strokes you add to your game. I think it's pretty fun, and I think golf's really popular right now with the Open just happening, so and Rocket League's always popular. I mean, that's just a notoriously good game, so I figured why not combine the two. The next step was to decide if I wanted to do it solo or work with a group. I've worked with developers and other artists before, and it's kind of a tug of war between creative freedom, so I wasn't really keen to grouping up with a developer or another visual artist. I wanted to keep that creative freedom, but I did team up with a brilliant musician named Bronson Bragg. This guy is amazing. He was able to create music custom for my game, all the sound effects I need. He's really just a solid musician. You should definitely check out his YouTube. I'll have it linked in the description below. Okay, so now that I had an idea and I knew who I was working with, I needed to start making the game. The first step to every game is to place a cube in Unity. Okay, so I added a color to the cube, I added a blue plane that the cube can sit on, and I added a white golf ball dice basically, and then I made it where the cube can move. Okay, now you can move the cube backwards and forwards, but I need to be able to turn it, so that was the next step. Then I wanted to make it where you could hit the golf ball, but you had to wait for it to land before you could hit it again, because it needed to land on a side, and then that side determines how many strokes you gain. Now I really started having fun with it. I wanted to make sure the cube could take off on sick jumps without the physics just going crazy. Then I had a brilliant idea of making an online game so it would actually be Rocket League-esque, where you can play online with random people, but only to find out that WebGL and HTML builds in Unity aren't supported for online Unity's networking solution. So then I was like, all right, well, why don't I just make a local multiplayer? And I actually had a prototype version of this working at one point, and I was able to connect 2 controllers or 2 keyboards, and you were able to play the game in local multiplayer split screen. But after the game jam continued, I was running out of time, and this was just taking up way too much time to make sure that the local multiplayer worked as well as the single player mode. So I ended up scrapping the local multiplayer, but it is good to know that at a certain point I did have a split screen version working, and that is something I could add back into the game later if I were to continue working on this game. Okay, now I needed to be able to tell what side of the dice it landed on depending on what side was pointing up. So what I did is I added 6 faces to the dice, 6 colliders, and then I added a raycast directly above the dice pointing down on it, and then whatever collider that raycast hit is what side of the dice is pointing up, and that's how I determined what side was pointing up to add to the stroke. I ended up watching an hour-long video on Rocket League physics, and that really gave me a good idea on how the physics worked and some kind of shortcuts you can take to make it feel a lot better versus Unity's standard physics system. This was super nice. So now that I understood this, I needed to add boosting, drifting, and jumping to the game, and after this was implemented, it actually felt surprisingly a lot like Rocket League. Obviously it's not identical, and it was made in 2 days, and Rocket League has its own custom physics engine, but I think it's pretty close for a 2-day game jam. Okay, so now that the movement felt good, I needed it to look good, so I separated the mesh render from the colliders, and I made it where the wheels turn when you're turning and the golf cart leans in the direction that the momentum is going. This made it feel really natural. Okay, so now I needed to make a golf ball, but since the golf ball had to be dice, it still needed to be a cube. So what I did is I just added a bunch of dimples to the cube to make it look like a golf ball, and then colored it so that the sides were appropriately labeled. Now that I had a golf ball, I needed a golf cart, so you're not just driving this janky cube around. So I hopped into Blender again and got to work on making a golf cart. This is really fun. I've only ever created 2 other 3D Unity games, and one of them was using pre-made assets. So it was really cool getting to re-familiarize myself with Blender and the 3D workflow, because most of my other games are 2D. Okay, now that I have a golf cart and a golf ball, I have to figure out how am I going to build a golf course in Unity. So I started thinking about different ways to model in Blender, and I was doing some research, and I came across Unity's terrain builder, which I had never used before. So I learned Unity's terrain builder in a couple tutorials real quick, and I started building out holes. I built out one hole and it looked really solid, so then I duplicated the terrain and started building the second hole, finished that one up, and when I flipped back to the first hole, even though I duplicated the terrain, they were still pointing to the same terrain mesh, so I was overwriting the terrain mesh that I originally created. So I lost a lot of time there, and then I ended up doing it again when I created a third hole. I thought I had duplicated the terrain mesh and I hadn't, so I wasted like 2 hours just overwriting my own holes. Eventually, instead of having it be different scenes that have different copies of terrain meshes, I had all 3 holes in the same scene, and then you just drive from hole to hole. This actually made it feel really good and almost like an open world game, which is where a lot of the positive feedback came from when people were playtesting my game. Okay, so I have a golf course and a golf cart and a golf ball or dice, and now I need a tee for the golf ball to sit on. This is actually a really important mechanic, because the tee is going to sit just under the golf ball as the golf ball floats and rotates, and what that allows is so that you can't really predict the side that the first one's going to land on, which allows for a lot more randomization, and you're not going to be able to kind of cheese the system. Also, with the golf ball floating above the tee, this adds a lot more loft during the first hit, which adds a lot more distance versus the golf ball sitting on the ground. So this was a very much needed change, and I think the tee turned out pretty good, and it was super easy to do in Blender. Okay, so the gameplay is working pretty good and everything feels good, and I got the holes created, but I had no UI. I had to add the sounds in still. So what I did is I added all the sounds in, and then I needed to create UI to adjust the sound level for music, ambient sounds, and sound effects. Bronson Bragg really provided some astonishingly good music in 2 days and sound effects for this game. So I really wanted to give the players the ability to listen to it as loud or as quiet as they wanted. So I added some sliders in there, and you can adjust the volume before you start the game or in the pause menu. But now that I got the sliders for the volume, I needed to make the UI look a little better. I was running out of time. This was like 3 hours, 2 hours before the game jam was over. So I just grabbed a free UI asset pack from the asset store and replaced the images, and then took a quick screenshot of the game and made that as the background for each of the scenes. And I think it turned out pretty good for something that I scrapped together in the last minute. I was running through some bug fixes and tweaking some audio, and I really didn't have a lot of time to implement UI, so that was one of my bigger afterthoughts, but I did get it done in time, so I'm pretty happy with how that part turned out. Okay, so with only 42 minutes left, it was time to publish, and this is always very questionable in game jams because the servers are just bogged down when it comes to the last like 2 to 3 hours of the game jam. So I was kind of risking it, publishing 42 minutes before the game jam ended, and I had only briefly tested what it would even play like in the HTML build, so I was really risky here, but everything worked out. I got it published with 42 minutes left. Everything worked. There was no bugs, major game breaking bugs or anything. So then I created the itch.io page and links and descriptions, and added some screenshots and a cover photo. The site was really slow, so this took quite a bit, but I did get it done in time. And so I did it. I started from the beginning to the end all by myself, besides the amazing music that Bronson Bragg provided. And I created a game from start to finish in 48 hours. So now that I created my game, what I usually like to do is play everyone else's game, because a lot of work goes into these games, and it would be pretty crappy to create these games and then no one play them. So I made sure to play. I played about 40 games, and I'll probably continue to play and rate them throughout the week. But it's just really cool seeing people's different takes on the theme. And there's even a few other golf games out there that are really similar to mine. I don't think I've seen any where you're hitting them with a golf cart like Rocket League. More just kind of like shooting the dice around a golf course, or I think there's even one where you actually hit it with a club. So it's just really fun getting to see what other developers have came up with in 48 hours and see where you compare with them and what you can improve upon and what you did really well on, so you know for next time, and so you know how to be a better game developer. So once I played a few games for a little bit, I hopped into some streams, did some shameless plugged my own game and watched people play my game. And honestly, that's my favorite part of game jams, is seeing and hearing people play your game and the reactions that they have, seeing them laugh. And a lot of the feedback I got from this game was, I forgot it was even a dice themed game. I was just having fun hitting a golf ball to a golf hole. I kept forgetting it was even a dice. A lot of people really liked the driving mechanics and said it really did feel really really solid and fun to just drive around the open world map. So I'm honestly very, very happy with how it turned out. I think this is one of my favorite games I've ever created, and I really love the fact that it's 3D. I really would like to work on it in the future and possibly add in local multiplayer, or depending on, you know, how many people are actually interested in a Rocket League-esque game but in golf, possibly making a full-fledged game on Steam with multiplayer. So I really have a lot of ideas that I could flesh out with this, and if I was able to get this far in 2 days, I feel like if I spent a good amount of time on this, I could really make a solid game ready for release on Steam in maybe even just a couple months. So if you're interested in this, definitely let me know in the comments below. There's a link to play it. I would love to hear your feedback on the game. If you do game jams too, feel free to link your own game. I would love to play those as well. And if you just like game dev or game developers, I actually have a channel devoted to a longer term project right here. So make sure you hit subscribe and like the video, and check out my playlist for my devlogs for my upcoming game Nano Planet. I really had a blast, and I look forward to next year's game jam. All right, thanks.